Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. My name is Dr. Keith McNally. This is another edition of the Envision Speaker Series. I'm here with Georgina Grace and Michelle Ann Collins, and we're going to take all of you who are watching and listening today on a very clear and specific journey because we're going to teach you something. We're going to teach you how to be present in the moment, especially in times of crisis or mental distress, because quite frankly, a lot of us are in it. It's 2023 is the time of this recording. And by golly, the level of stress that we're being faced with as humans, as individuals, is increasing. So we need to be mindful and recognize that we can be more powerful in those situations and not let those situations take over who we are. And so, Georgina, Michelle, welcome to the conversation. How are you
Thank
doing
you.
today?
Thank you, Keith. Doing well, doing well.
It's
I
nice
would
to
love.
be here.
Well, good. I'm glad. So what I want to do to start is to give both of you an opportunity to talk about why you're here, what value are you bringing to the conversation, and what do you want to see as a result of this conversation? And I don't care who starts.
Oh, I'm happy to start. I'm here because, well, first of all, I'm a big fan of Dr. Keith McNally, and I was just very honored to be invited to be part of this speaker series because I am a grief worker and I've been through the suicide of my spouse. I've been through the death of my mother, and what when I went on my dark night of the soul journey, I found that as a yoga therapist and a coach, that I can help others go through what I went through with hopefully less suffering than I did. So I offer tools that come from the lineage of yoga. I offer tools, meditation and mindfulness, and general coaching tools to help people suffer less when they are going through difficult times.
I love it. Georgina, what brings you to the table today?
My friend Michelle, and
Gotcha.
she did. She introduced us, Keith, and I'm here as a grief and trauma specialist, specifically a mind-body therapist, because what I know is our stress and anxiety starts in the brain, but it is really the body that can bring us back into that place of harmony in the midst of chaos. So I'm trained as a Rubenfeld synergist. I also spent decades working with people as a speech language pathologist. And those were people who had had strokes or a head injury that got them out of the present moment and into a state of confusion. So they were in constant stress. So like Michelle, I too have had many people in my family die. In fact, there were 5 people that passed in less than 4 years, 2 of whom by suicide, my brother Mark and my son Reed. And so I understand what it's like to go through that valley of grief and not build a condo there, but instead come to this place of being able to say, oh, I caused myself some suffering while I was there. And like you, Michelle, I would like to offer tools so people don't have to stay in that suffering. They can recognize it, relate to it, and release it.
Well, I appreciate that from both of you. I know we said earlier that our goal is to help people learn how to be present, but I want to get even more granular than that. Excuse me. And I want to know what each of you would really like to see happen as a result of this conversation, because we're going to get there and we want to make sure that our audience gets there too with us. What do you want to give, or what do you want to see happen as a result of this conversation?
For me, what I would like to have happen is as a result of investing your time, your energy, and your presence, each of you in this audience leave with the awareness of how important it is to be in the present moment and empowered to do that, even in the midst of struggle and stress.
Michelle?
Perfect. Yes, I am definitely everything Georgina said. And the only thing I would add is that we are going to offer very practical tools that can be used at any time that stress is felt, or de-stress, or grief, or lack of acceptance of presence of what's going on in the present moment. So we're going to offer very practical tools to help our audience, to be able to find themselves present, represent,
Mhm.
so they can then use whatever tools they need to support themselves through their journey.
I appreciate that. No, I want to start the conversation, excuse me, with how I'm feeling about this conversation. I live here in Virginia, and I live on a off of a semi-busy road. So the road behind me does get traffic a lot. It's not like a major highway or anything, but it is a flow through road from one end to the other of my neighborhood. And there's two traffic lights out here. And this may seem nominal to most people, but for whatever reason, if you don't move, if your foot isn't on the gas pedal at the second that that red light turns green, somebody's honking their horn. And I'm thinking to myself, and it happens quite frequently, and I'm thinking to myself, what is the level of stress, anxiety, frustration? Or is it just a whole lot of caffeine and they don't know how to get rid of it? I don't know. That's going on in people's lives, that they have to constantly be pushing and pushing and pushing, that even if somebody delays an action by a hair of a second, we are immediately responding in a very negative way. And so that may or may not be part of this conversation, but every time I think about mental distress or crises or anxiety, that always comes to the forefront of my mind because it's right here with me. Now, I have the ability to isolate myself. I'm usually in this office space 8 or more hours a day, and I don't have to deal with the driving and traffic and whatnot, but I hear it. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking, wow, so many people are living in a state of anxiety. I would imagine that that is their first reaction to, if somebody else isn't doing something, I'm going to urge them on. Let's talk about that for a moment. Let's talk about what it means to be in mental distress or crises or a state of anxiety that takes over our thinking, that we can't navigate life the way it should be navigated. What does that look like from both of you?
I would like to respond to the visual that you gave us, the event,
Okay.
because what my definition of stress is, Keith, is stress equals lack of time, lack of money, lack of moving forward. And that's what I was hearing. If you don't move like that, then there's that pause, there's that lack, and I'm missing out on something. This is far different from FOMO, fear of missing out. This is what you were saying with the pushing, what you were saying with the driving. Those were some of the words that I was hearing, whether you used them or not, as you were describing this event. So that's my take on it. It's that fear underneath that if you don't move, I'm not going to have my turn.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a great definition, Georgina. I appreciate that. And I'm just gonna, because that covers most of it, I'm just gonna add that lack of awareness could be part of this. If you take a deep breath and realize that the difference between 1 or 2 seconds after that light turns green that you get to go is really negligible. There's really not going to be a difference in your life to you in any way if you go in 1 second or 4 seconds. But we are wired to be on the lookout for anything that's happening that's wrong. That's part of our evolution. And so if we feel that we're missing out, like Georgina said, we're going to honk immediately instead of maybe taking a moment of, how would my higher self, my higher thinking self respond to this? Well, maybe that person, maybe the kid's crying in the back of the car and they were looking over their shoulder, or maybe they're distracted because they got in a, tiff with someone at work, or, the kind of compassionate thinking that comes from a more open heart and a more calm body and a more compassionate way of living.
I love it. Earlier in the call, and even before the call, we talked about what it means to be in mental distress, and that's kind of taking over a lot of our lives. But the two of you come to this conversation having lost somebody through death and even through suicide. And that's that puts anybody through a significant place, a dark place in their life, fear, frustration, confusion, crisis, and mental distress. Can you talk about what that really encompasses in terms of how it impacts the mind and the body? Because you indicated that it starts here, but it's experienced here. Is that true?
Mhm. Mhm.
How does that work?
Michelle, do you want to start with that, or do you want me
Sure.
to?
I'm happy to
Yes.
start. I love that
Mhm.
we have the both of us here to, fill in any blanks one of us left. It's pretty great.
It is.
So when we're presented with a challenge of any kind, there are a number of different responses that we can have depending on the state that we're in. During our evolution, the challenge was usually something really life-threatening, right? When we were living out in caves or out in the plains, if there was a challenge, it was something was going to kill us, or it was time to kill something. And so our nervous system developed to have these really intense, stressful responses to challenge. But now that we've evolved, into these wonderful, comfortable lives for the fortunate, I understand there are a lot of people that don't have the daily comforts. But what happens is our nervous system doesn't always respond in a way that our mind could understand. For example, when you get honked at because you didn't go as soon as the light turned green, you may have this whole physiological cascade of reactions, including a spike of cortisol, a heart rate increase, a blood pressure increase. Your blood vessels may constrict or open because you're getting ready for fight or flight. But you're just sitting in your car and your mind can tell your body that. But your body's like, okay, I'm being chased by a bear. I have to do everything I can to not die right now. And so this misdirection that happens because of our evolution can be overcome with these presence practices we're going to talk about. It can be overcome with studying compassion, with meditation, with mindfulness practices. But most of us on an everyday basis, when we get honked at, aren't going to be able to do that. So our body responds to what our mind perceives as a threat.
And
I
sometimes it
really,
can, really
no,
quick,
no.
Georgina, if you don't mind it, sometimes it can really feel like an actual threat, even though it's just a honking of a horn. The
Mm-hmm.
way everything is escalating, and I don't want to put too much emphasis on a lot of the environmental stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
it can feel like, man, if I don't move right now, he's coming out of the car and he may
Yeah.
do something to me. And it does tend to feel that way. But Georgina,
Yeah.
I want you to add to what Michelle just said.
It's very interesting when we are in a state of fear, things are really triggering for us. We feel very activated, like it's a fight or flight. I remember years ago, probably around 2005, I borrowed my son's car because he needed mine and his was old, and I had to go to the dentist. And it was very early in the morning. It was dark. And I live in Portland, Oregon, where there are many, many bridges. So the car was full of gas and everything was going along. And I started up the bridge, and all of a sudden, this old Audi just shuddered. And my foot was on the gas. And I pushed down and nothing happened. And I pushed down again and the car engaged. Well, my thought when I pushed down that first time and nothing happened was, oh my gosh, I'm going to be the stalled car on the bridge, and I'm going to ruin everything for everyone in Portland, Oregon this morning.
Oh.
Well, later that afternoon, or evening rather, I showed up at Bikram Yoga. It's that hot yoga you do. And as I brought my knee up on the right side and then kicked my leg out and held my foot actually started, and my whole leg doing this. It was releasing the trauma experience that I'd actually had. Now, I am not sure that I would have had that reaction in yoga class if I hadn't believed that I was super responsible and would ruin everyone's day. Thankfully, it is many years later. And if that happened again, I would just speak to the car and I'd say, okay, kid, we cannot do this now. Let's just move forward. And I would be in a very different state of being in the present moment. In 2005, I was in fear. Now, because I've done all these practices and am aware, my mind, you see, started that fear thought and my body took it on. I don't think that would happen today. I would see that green light as the second car behind Keith, and I go, oh, good, it's green. I'm going to go with the green. And that's a very different response than it is with, would you hurry up so I can get through the green?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love how, I just have to say, I love, Georgina, how your fear was that you were going to ruin other people's day. My fear, if I was stuck on that bridge, and I think I know where you were, is someone's going to run into me and push my car off the bridge or crash into me. I would have been in fear for my physical safety, and you're worried about everyone's day. I love you so much.
Well,
Actually,
that's just the way we are. Yes, right.
actually, that can be equally as terrifying because we we fear how we cause other people to feel.
Yes.
And that is a very significant type of mental distress. It's like, oh my God, am I at fault here for everybody else's day? Bad day, whatever. Um, Fight or flight situation, Michelle. Oh my God, I don't want to die.
Right.
Because very, very similar because you're telling me easily that the body responds to our circumstances in very unique ways, but there's a way, and both of you know, and we're going to get to this conversation, to really turn that situation on its side because, Georgina, you just said you would have a very different reaction to that same situation today because you have a different perspective on it. And so I do want to get there. We want to talk about some practices from both of you, and in order to change the way we think about that. One of the things that I remember talking with Michelle about was this meditative practice that really intrigued me at the time, and since then has intrigued me even more. And you called it, Michelle, the 5 sense meditation. Um, can we dive into that? Because it's really, I found it fascinating because it takes us on the journey that we want to go to in this conversation. Can we tackle that part of the conversation now?
Sure, I'd love to. And this is a practice that you can use anytime you notice that you're in distress. Anytime, I mean, probably not when your car's stalled on the bridge because you really need to attend to getting your car moving, but when you're safe, when you're not in threat of being hit by another car. Anytime you're feeling uncomfortable, stressed, fearful, this is a way to connect to the present moment and reestablish those feelings of safety. So did you want me to run through the practice real
And
quick,
I want
Keith?
you to teach me because you did something with
Okay.
your hands, I think. If that's not, yes?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I'll just run us all through a 5 sense meditation practice.
Okay.
Okay. So part of the reason this practice is so useful when you're in distress is you don't have to sit still, you don't have to close your eyes, because sometimes those things can actually be really hard to access if you're very spun up and very, very in fight or flight. So the way you bring yourself back into calm is you start by, if you can take a deep breath, that's always the best, but sometimes you can't even do that. If you can, I like to put my hands on my belly, low belly, and if you can feel movement in your low belly, that means you're taking a belly breath, or otherwise known as diaphragmatic breath. And those deep breaths will help calm the nervous system, calm the body. If you're not feeling any movement in your hand, if you're just feeling it here in your chest, then you're not in a calm state. You're still in fight or flight. So that's one way. And then to get yourself, if you can get into that deep breath, great. If not, then remember to connect to your 5 senses, and that will help calm you and bring you into the present moment. 5 senses. So the first one is you look around at 5 things. And when you're doing this, you're not judging. This is always a hard one for me to do at home because I look around and I see things I want to clean or dust or, oh, that needs to go. But if you can, you come back from judgment and analyzing, and you're just looking, staying away from, oh, that's pleasurable or not pleasurable, that's pretty or not pretty, and anything like that. Without judgment, you're just looking and noticing 5 different things.
Okay.
And then the next one is 4 things you can feel. So you might be able to feel the fabric of your clothes. You might be able to feel your feet in your shoes. Maybe your shoes are comfortable or uncomfortable. But either way, you can feel, maybe if you're wearing shoes, you can feel a little hug on your feet, your behind on your chair. You can feel the weight and just notice, okay, the chair's holding me up. So you go on to 5 different things. Maybe you feel hot or cold. Maybe your skin feels soft or dry and rough. You can actually touch your skin. So 4 things you can feel. Yeah. And then you move to your sense of hearing and see if you can hear 3 different things. A lot of times our hearing, it's very sensitive. So we tend to tune out a lot of the sounds that we're actually exposed to. We don't hear them because we're not listening. And that's a safety measure because there's so many sounds we would be thinking about. We would be everywhere at once. So if you sit quietly, you may be able to tune into things near and far. Maybe one of the things you hear is your breath. Maybe you hear the hum of a fan in the room that you hadn't noticed until you started to listen. Maybe you hear a distant horn honking or a distant dog barking or something like that. And just without reacting, just noticing these 3 things that your ears are sensing. And then once you've done the 5, 4, 3, then 2 things you can smell. And again, our sense of smell is so sensitive that normally the way that our nose works, or our sense of smell, is that we'll smell something for a little bit and then the sense will kind of not smell it anymore, right? You get acclimated to it. So if you really focus, yeah, I saw you smelling your hand, right? You can smell, did I have lotion on my hand that smells good? You might be able to smell a little leftover lunch or your coffee or tea. But usually there's more than two things, but try to at least find two things, yeah, that you can smell. And then finally, taste. So even if you haven't eaten anything too recently, you can often find there's a taste in your mouth, some subtle taste. It could be left over from lunch. It could be that last sip of tea. And it might be something as simple as my mouth tastes a little bit sweet or a little bit salty, something like that. It might not be a whole flavor. So once you've run through the five senses, usually by the time you're done, and not always, I don't want people to think there's a way to fail. There's no failing here. But if you've run through that practice, even if you were only able to connect to one or two things, you will have come into the present moment. And in the present moment, you can lessen your suffering. Eckhart Tolle says, in the present moment, there is no suffering. But I have a little, I chew on that comment. It's a lot, it's a big comment. But yeah, so that's the five sense meditation. And I hope that the audience will be able to use that anytime that you're feeling a little bit spun up or anxious or not present, ruminating, worrying about something that's maybe going to happen, or maybe something that you had in the past that's still bothering you, something like that. So it's kind of like taking a little vacation from your worries.
Oh, I like that. A little vacation from my worries. Now, you made the process, and I'm listening to the way you're working through the meditative journey, and I like to use the word journey. I wrote a book on what it means to walking a path, a leader's journey. Know what it means to go from point A to point B to point C in order to get somewhere. And looking, touching, hearing, feeling are all external senses. They're all external from the body. But then you went inside. You went to a taste, which is an inside. And you only said we could taste one thing. You only allow us to taste one, whatever's left over in our mouth, whatever we, and for me, it may be, if I was to do this in the morning, it would be the leftover flavor of coffee, probably.
Mm-hmm.
I know that in Georgina's thinking, that has significance, that we go from the outside to the inside. Georgina, can you touch on that? Can you speak on that a little bit, to the value of that journey of going from the outside to the inside?
Yes, because the only way through grief is to go in. The only way out through grief is to go in. And so it's very, very important to come into connection with ourselves. And we do that, Keith, when we become present to feeling our feet. And that's interesting. I saw you cock your head. Well, gee whiz, what's this thing? Feel your feet.
Talk to me.
Very interesting how Michelle touched on feet. So I'm going to invite our audience right now, unless you're driving or riding a bicycle or walking, to just pause for a moment, to put your feet on the floor and to notice, is there one foot that's bigger, wider, heavier, or longer than the other? Now, you may benefit from closing your eyes or casting them down, because what this does is this takes you inside. It's a process called interoception. And it's going within to deeply connect with ourselves. So try that again as you close your eyes or cast them down, and simply notice, is there one foot that's bigger, wider, heavier, perhaps longer than the other? And 95% of the people usually experience that. The others don't, because their feet are perfectly in balance. And so, Keith, I'm wondering, in this moment, what's your experience in this moment?
I went back. Can I really talk about this?
Absolutely. This is
That's my
a
show.
conversation,
That's my show
not a
too.
performance. This is a conversation.
Well, because you used the word heavy. What foot did you feel was it was heavier, you know?
Mhm.
And so when you said that and you were talking about her feet, this may seem so insignificant. In Marine Corps boot camp, so I'm going way, way back
You
to
are.
like my teenage years, and
Okay.
I'm a bit older than that. Um, there we do a cadence when we run or we march, and so when we run, we usually sing a song. What we call it's a cadence, and so it keeps us in line and in step because we're usually doing everything as a platoon. So we got people on top of people, and so if we're stepping over people's feet, that's not a good thing. Anyway, I digress. One of the cadences is heavy on the left foot as part of the cadence. So, and then
Wow.
we'll count heavy on the left foot, you know, one, two, to keep everybody in step. I know there's a reason for it to keep everybody in the same step again, so that we're not tripping over each other. So, and as soon as you mentioned that, I'm thinking my left foot is heavy. Which was really weird because I just kind of tapped into that and I walk and I hike, and so and that's another conversation for another time. But I walk and hike daily, 9 miles at this point, and that's a lot of miles for a day.
Yeah.
I still kind of keep myself in cadence, even in my head. And I typically, and people who know me for who I am, I'm very regimented as a person, and so even my shoelaces are laced left over right. You know, all the depends, and you got to anyway. That's another story too. But my left foot is heavier, and it is heavier. So it was just kind of odd that you had mentioned that.
Mhm.
Is there
Mhm.
is that significant? Now I'm asking a real question. Is that significant? Do I need to be concerned about my left foot being heavier?
No, and we're not even done. This was just a pause. So, Michelle, I'm curious, what was your experience of your
Well,
feet?
to be honest, I've never evaluated the size and weight of my feet from the inside out. So it was a unique experience for me.
Mhm.
I If I was evaluating it, I would say my right foot is longer than my left foot.
Mhm.
But I
Mhm.
also appreciated just the attention, because of the present moment practice that it was.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do first is we bring
Mhm.
ourselves present and connected to our feet. So, audience, I don't know if you've had your eyes closed through this whole thing or if you opened them to see our expressions, but we've been very expressive. So, now what I'm going to do is invite everyone once again to put your feet back on the floor, to close your eyes or cast them down, and notice if your heavy, wider, longer foot has changed because of the dialogue. It may or may not have. And so now what I'm going to invite you to do is come up on the toes of the foot that is heavier, wider, longer. Just there's more to that foot. So you're up on your toes. Now listen to that metaphor. How often are we up on our toes and relaxed? Not usually. So just in this moment, be up on your toes with the awareness that you're going to stay present to this foot as you move your heel, which is up in the air, to the left and then to the right, as if it is a windshield wiper. So you're just moving that heel of the heavier foot left to right very slowly. And now notice the sensation of movement. Do you feel it in the front of your foot? Do you notice it in the arch? Does your heel have a sensation as you're slowly moving this foot? Do you notice a movement in your ankle, your calf, your knee, your thigh, your hip? Guess what? You can't get this wrong. This is your experience. And then I invite you to place that foot now back down on the floor and come back into the present moment by opening your eyes. And Keith, what was that like for you today to do that?
A little different.
Tell me more. Mhm.
One, I wear boots a lot. So whether I'm hiking and even now, I'm wearing
Mhm.
boots, and that's typically my footwear, is a
Yes.
boot, more of a construction boot. So
Mhm.
movement for me
Oh,
is
yeah.
very tight and constricted.
Mhm.
Uh, Now, I'm comfortable in boots, again, all the way back from a Marine, so some habits are hard to die. Um, so it was constricting. The movement was constricting because the boot in the boot in and of itself is heavy. Yeah.
Exactly. And I imagine it was very difficult to come up on your toes. Mhm.
I
And
have to
so,
stretch the ankle, and yeah, and so when I do
sure.
that, the front part, the top part of my foot is
Yes,
pressing against the shoe, which is
right.
not so tight that it's, laced so tight that it's constricting blood flow, but it is secured to my foot.
Hmm.
And
So
I
it
felt
was
that.
sure. And what happened then when you put your heel back down on the floor?
It releases the tension. My
Hmm.
foot is more comfortable and in its
Yes.
proper place.
And I'm very curious, did the heaviness go away?
I don't feel it to be heavy.
There. And that's it. It's a very interesting experience to have that very slow, intentional movement happen under your direction. You're doing this. And then so many times the heaviness vanishes, the largeness vanishes, and the 2 feet come back into alignment. So, Michelle, what was your experience like?
Well, I'm a yogi, so of course I love stretching anything I can.
Yes.
Um,
And
so
I
it's
bet you
pleasure.
weren't wearing boots.
No, I um, do have something on my feet, but
Mhm.
the recording's only from the elbows up. So yeah, no, it was yeah, like I said, it's pleasurable for me to stretch. So I was stretching each toe and lifting my heel and enjoying the strengthening into the calf. Yeah, and then
Mhm.
I was following. My attention was following the anatomical lines all the way up to the hip. Because I'm an anatomy geek.
Sure. And
And
so
then
what, yes. And then what happened?
when I
Mhm.
put it back down, I
Yes.
actually felt I definitely the foot felt more the same size and weight as the other foot, but the other thing I noticed was my calf felt very, very light, like almost airy, which
Mm.
I have no explanation for, but it
Hmm.
wasn't an unpleasant experience.
Hmm. And wonderful awareness. And so the reason that we chose to explore this with the audience today is that most of our audience does have 2 feet. And listen to the metaphor of stand on your own 2 feet. And when you feel your feet, whether sitting or in the old Audi like I did, you can do this particular practice almost anywhere. It can be done on the subway. It can be done as you're driving, as you're sitting, as you're standing. And it simply brings you into the awareness of how much of you is in your body. Because, yes, Keith, because with the chaos we're experiencing, so many times people leave their body. And as a result of that, we're just not home. And we can't access our well-being within because we're not there. But this particular practice brings you into connection with the ground beneath you and your own feet as they're connecting to that.
Georgina, Michelle, I don't think this conversation is over. Now, our time is about up, but I don't think this conversation is over only because of what you just said, and I wasn't prepared for that. That when we're in a state of crisis or whatever that looks like, we leave our body. And that didn't make sense to me at all because I'm a very practical person. But the two of you are experts in this area, and I respect that. And so I wouldn't mind if the two of you came back and explored that conversation with me if you felt it valuable. I'll leave
One of
that
the,
I'll leave that I'll leave that alone for now, and we could talk about that afterwards. To end this conversation, I want you to explain, and I think you just tapped into it, is that when we're in a situation, we leave our body. And in order
often,
to,
most of the
oh,
many,
okay,
many, many times.
okay,
I'm
okay.
not going to say 100% of the time.
That's okay. And
Okay.
I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm not.
No,
Uh,
I said it that way and I
okay.
wanted to clarify it.
Oh, okay.
You didn't. Mhm.
But our goal is to bring people present and help them understand the value of what it means to be present and give them practical things to do to be present. So I want you to answer one question for me from both of you. When somebody gains the ability to be present in the moment and to be calm and conscious and aware in that moment, how much of themselves do they have control over, and why is that important?
Mhm.
And I
I
don't
would love
care.
to, I'll tackle that to begin with a quote from Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor and also a psychologist and wrote several books, one of which is Man's Search for Meaning. And if anyone hasn't read that, please do. It's fundamental spiritual growth. What he said was, in the space between stimulation or challenge and response, there is a space between stimulus and response. And in that space is our power to choose. And in that choice is our freedom. I might have botched that, but it was close. So when you practice mindfulness and you can be in the present moment, that space becomes big enough that you are able to choose, what would my higher self, what is my wisest choice? What can I do in this space to improve my health and well-being, or the health and well-being of my loved ones, instead of honking? So that's my answer to
Mhm.
you, Dr. Keith.
And I just simply expand on that, calling it the power of the pause.
Yes.
And so when we're in that moment of awareness, connected to ourselves, then we can ask, what is the most kind and loving thing I can do for myself right now? What's the powerful action to take? Or in this moment, am I just simply being?
That was
Beautiful.
beautiful. We said it at the same time. Georgina, Michelle, thank you for being on this call. Thank you for being part of this conversation. And thank you for giving me some insight into who I am today. For those of you
Thank
who
you
are
for having us, Keith.
You're very, very welcome. It was a
absolutely.
joy.
For those of you who are watching and listening, of course, this is Dr. Keith McNally on the Envision Speaker Series. I'll see you next time. Take care.